The kitchen faucet had been dripping for 3 weeks. Not the gentle, rhythmic kind that lulls you to sleep, the irregular, maddening type that makes you question your sanity at 2 a.m. I'd been meaning to fix it, but between deadlines at the engineering firm and Nora's increasingly erratic behavior, home repairs had taken a back seat. I was elbow deep under the sink, wrench in hand, when she walked in. Her footsteps were different, hesitant, like she was approaching a wild animal. In the reflection of the chrome pipe, I could see her pale face, hands trembling as she gripped the door frame. "Jack, I need to tell you something." The wrench slipped, and I banged my knuckle against the shut-off valve. "Can it wait? I'm trying to stop this thing from turning our water bill into a mortgage payment." "No, it can't wait." Something in her voice made me slide out from under the sink. Nora stood there in her real estate blazer, the navy blue one she wore to close big deals. Her usually perfect blonde hair was disheveled, and her mascara had smudged slightly under her left eye. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words falling like stones into still water. 11 weeks. For a moment, the only sound was that infernal drip. I set the wrench down carefully, buying myself time to process what should have been joyful news. We'd been trying for 2 years, through fertility specialists and ovulation calendars, and enough disappointment to fill Lake Michigan. I started, then noticed she wasn't smiling. "That's wonderful, isn't it?" Nora's composure cracked like ice on a warm day. "It's Tommy's." My brother's name hit me like a physical blow. Tommy Brennan, my half-brother from my father's second marriage. The charming failure who borrowed money he never repaid and told stories that got better with each retelling. "What do you mean, it's Tommy's?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, unfolding it with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "March 15th, the Marriott downtown. March 22nd, that conference in Springfield. April 3rd, the Riverside Inn." Each date was a knife twist. The Marriott was the night I'd worked late on the Henderson project. Springfield was when she'd claimed a weekend retreat with her sister. The Riverside Inn, I remembered that one. I'd been home with food poisoning while she attended a networking event. "You made a list," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. I wanted to be honest about everything. Complete transparency. Complete transparency, like she was presenting a quarterly sales report instead of demolishing our marriage with surgical precision. The front door opened, and Tommy's voice echoed through the hallway. "Nora, you told him yet?" He appeared in the kitchen doorway, overnight bag in hand, wearing that crooked smile that had charmed teachers, employers, and apparently my wife. At 34, Tommy still looked like the college quarterback he'd never quite been, tall, broad-shouldered, with prematurely gray hair that somehow made him look distinguished instead of old. "Perfect timing," I said. "Let me guess. You're here to explain how this is all for the best." Tommy set his bag down and spread his hands in a gesture of false humility. "Look, Jack, nobody planned this. But now that it's happened, we need to think about what's right for the child." "The child," I repeated the words, trying to make them feel real. "Your child." "Our child," Nora corrected softly. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in like a trash compactor. These two people, my wife of 8 years and my brother, stood there looking at me with expressions of carefully practiced concern, as if I were the problem that needed solving. "So what's the plan?" I asked. "You two ride off into the sunset, and I just..." "What? Send Christmas cards?" Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, we were hoping you'd consider letting us stay here, for a while anyway. The baby should grow up in the family home." The family home. The 3-bedroom colonial that my grandfather built in 1952, that my father had left to me in his will specifically because Tommy had already blown through his inheritance on a series of failed business ventures. "You want me to give you my house?" "Not give," Nora said quickly. "We'd handle the mortgage payments, the utilities, everything. You could find an apartment in town, start fresh. It would be better for everyone." Better for everyone. I looked at these two people who'd systematically betrayed me, who'd planned this conversation down to the talking points, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too immediate. This was something else entirely. "I need some time to think," I said. Tommy's smile widened. "Of course. This is a lot to process. Take all the time you need." They exchanged a look. Quick, satisfied, like conspirators who'd just pulled off a heist. They thought they'd won. They thought guilt and shock had broken me. They were wrong. After they left to give me space, I sat in my workshop behind the garage, surrounded by the tools and projects that had always been my refuge. The workbench was scarred from years of use, covered with half-finished repairs and engineering sketches. This was where I came to think, to solve problems that had clear solutions. I opened the old filing cabinet in the corner and pulled out a folder marked Property Documents. Inside were the original deed to the house, my father's will, and several other papers I'd kept for sentimental reasons. But sentiment was a luxury I could no longer afford. The deed was in my name alone. Nora had never been added, despite her hints over the years. My father, in his wisdom, had structured his will to prevent exactly this kind of situation. The house could only be transferred to another Brennan, or sold to a third party. Tommy, as a Brennan, qualified, but there were other options. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Marcus Webb, a lawyer I'd known since high school. Marcus specialized in real estate law and had helped me navigate the probate process when my father passed. "Jack Brennan," Marcus said when he answered. "How's the domestic engineering business?" "Complicated. I need some advice about property transfers, hypothetically speaking." "Hypothetical advice is the best kind. What's the situation?" "Say someone wanted to sell their house but maintain some control over what happened to it. What would be the cleanest way to do that?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Shell company. Create an LLC, transfer the property to the company, then lease it back to whoever you want to control it. Gives you flexibility and legal distance." "How long would something like that take to set up?" "If you're motivated, a week, maybe 2. Jack, is everything all right?" "Just exploring options. I'll call you tomorrow if I decide to move forward." After hanging up, I sat in the growing darkness of the workshop, listening to the familiar sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night, Mrs. Peterson's dog barking at shadows, the distant hum of traffic on Route 9. The life I'd built here, piece by piece, year by year. Tommy and Nora thought they'd cornered me. They'd presented their betrayal like a business proposition, expecting me to roll over and accept their terms. But they'd forgotten something important about me. I was an engineer. When I saw a problem, I didn't just accept it, I solved it. The next morning, I found them in the kitchen, sharing coffee and making plans. They'd slept in the guest room, and seeing them there together, comfortable and domestic, should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it clarified things. "I've made a decision," I announced. They looked up expectantly, hope and anxiety mixing in their expressions. "I'll sell you the house," I said. "Fair market value, no family discount. You can arrange your own financing." Tommy's face fell. "Jack, be reasonable. We don't have that kind of money liquid. The real estate market is... Then I'll sell it to someone else." Nora reached across the table and touched my hand. "Jack, please, think about what's best for the baby." I pulled my hand away gently. "I am thinking about the baby. Children need stability, security. They need parents who can provide for them." I looked directly at Tommy. "Can you provide for them, Tommy? Because your track record suggests otherwise." Tommy's jaw tightened. "That's not fair. I've had some setbacks, but the restaurant in Portland, the import business, the cryptocurrency thing. Should I keep going?" Those were learning experiences. Expensive ones, especially for the people who invested in them. The room fell silent except for the coffee makers gurgling. I could see them recalculating, trying to figure out how to salvage their plan. "What if we worked something out?" Nora suggested. "A lease-to-own arrangement? We could make monthly payments until we've covered the full value." I pretended to consider this. That could work, but I'd need guarantees, insurance, protection for my investment. "Of course," Tommy said quickly. "Whatever you need." "Good. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers. In the meantime, you're welcome to stay in the guest room while we work out the details." They exchanged another look. Relief this time. They thought they'd negotiated their way out of trouble. They thought I was being reasonable, even generous. They had no idea what reasonable looked like. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal documents and careful planning. I told Marcus Webb enough of the truth to get his help without revealing the full scope of what I had in mind. As far as he knew, I was going through a divorce and wanted to protect my assets. Not technically a lie. The LLC formation was surprisingly straightforward. Brennan Holdings, LLC, became the official owner of 47 Maple Street, with me as the sole managing member. The transfer looked like a legitimate sale to anyone who didn't dig too deep into the corporate structure. Tommy and Nora, meanwhile, were playing house with an enthusiasm that might have been charming if it wasn't so nauseating. They'd rearranged the living room furniture, hung new curtains in the bedroom, and started talking about converting my home office into a nursery. "We should probably repaint," Nora said one evening, gesturing at the sage green walls I'd carefully chosen 2 years earlier. "Something more cheerful. Yellow maybe, since we don't know the gender yet. Yellow sounds perfect, I agreed, making a note on my phone. Every change they made, every assumption of ownership, was another nail in their coffin. I'd also started my own investigation into the timeline Nora had presented. The dates she'd given me were precise, but precision could be manufactured. I needed to know if this pregnancy was real, and if it was, whether Tommy was actually the father. The first crack in their story came from an unexpected source. I was having lunch at Murphy's Deli when Ellen Rodriguez, Nora's sister, slid into the booth across from me. "Jack, I'm so sorry about everything," she said, her dark eyes filled with genuine sympathy. "Nora told me what happened." "It's not your fault, Ellen. These things happen." She fidgeted with her napkin, clearly uncomfortable. "Can I ask you something? When did Nora tell you she was pregnant?" 2 weeks ago. Why?" Ellen's face crumpled slightly. "She told me 6 weeks ago. She swore me to secrecy, said she needed time to figure out how to handle things with Tommy." 6 weeks ago. That meant Nora had known about the pregnancy and Tommy's alleged paternity for a month and a half before her carefully orchestrated confession. The timeline she'd presented wasn't the result of panic or guilt, it was a script. "Did she mention the dates to you? The hotels?" Ellen shook her head. "She just said it had been going on for a while. Jack, I tried to talk her out of it. I told her she was making a huge mistake, but she said you'd understand. She said you'd want what was best for the baby." After Ellen left, I sat in my truck in the deli parking lot, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. This wasn't a passionate affair that had spiraled out of control. It was a calculated plan, executed with the kind of precision Nora brought to her real estate deals. But why? What did she and Tommy gain from destroying my marriage and claiming my house? The answer came to me that evening when I was going through our joint financial statements. Nora had always handled our investments. Claiming her real estate background gave her better insight into market trends. I'd trusted her judgment, focusing on my engineering work while she managed our portfolio. Looking at the statements with fresh eyes, I saw patterns I'd missed before. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Investments in properties that had lost value consistently. Our retirement savings, once healthy, had been steadily depleted over the past 18 months. I called our financial advisor the next morning. "Jack, good to hear from you," David Chen said. "How's Nora? I haven't spoken to her since she closed out the Wellington account." "She closed an account?" "Last month. Said you two were restructuring your investments. Moved about $40,000 into a private equity fund she was working with. High risk, high reward type of deal. $40,000. Gone. Without my knowledge or consent, into some venture that probably existed only on paper. David, I need you to freeze all our joint accounts immediately. Don't allow any transactions without my explicit approval." "Is everything all right?" "Let's just say I'm being more cautious about our financial security." After hanging up, I sat back in my office chair, staring at the ceiling. The picture was becoming clearer. Nora and Tommy hadn't just betrayed me personally, they'd been systematically looting our assets. The pregnancy, real or fabricated, was their exit strategy. They'd claim the house, I'd disappear into some apartment across town, and they'd have eliminated the only person who might notice the missing money. It was actually a clever plan. If I hadn't been an engineer, trained to notice when systems didn't work the way they were supposed to, they might have pulled it off. But I was an engineer, and I was very good at fixing broken systems. That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse and spent 3 hours in the records office, researching property transfers and business filings. What I found confirmed my suspicions and added new wrinkles to the story. Tommy had been busy over the past year. He'd formed 2 LLCs, both with addresses that traced back to a mail forwarding service. He'd also filed incorporation papers for something called Riverside Development Group, listing himself as president and Nora as vice president. Riverside Development, the same name as the inn where Nora claimed one of their encounters had taken place. I photographed the documents with my phone and drove home, my mind racing. They'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. The affair story was just cover for a more elaborate scheme. But I still needed proof of the financial fraud, and I needed to know if the pregnancy was real. The first question was easier to answer. That evening, while Tommy and Nora were out at what they claimed was a doctor's appointment, I went through Nora's home office. Her computer was password protected, but she'd always used the same password for everything, our wedding date followed by her maiden name. Her email account was a treasure trove, months of correspondence with Tommy about investment opportunities and property development deals. References to accounts I'd never heard of, and meetings I'd never been told about. Most damning of all, a series of emails discussing how to handle Jack when the time came to restructure the partnership. I forwarded the most incriminating messages to a new email account I'd created, then deleted the forwarded items from Nora's sent folder. Let them think their secrets were still safe. The pregnancy question was trickier. I couldn't exactly demand a paternity test without revealing my hand, but I could observe, and I could ask the right questions. When they returned from their supposed appointment, I was waiting in the living room with a bottle of champagne. "What's this for?" Nora asked, eyeing the bottle suspiciously. "To celebrate. I realized I've been handling this all wrong. You're going to have a baby. That's wonderful news. I should be supporting you, not making things difficult." Tommy relaxed visibly. "That means a lot, Jack. I know the situation isn't ideal, but we're family." "Exactly. Family supports each other." I popped the cork and poured 3 glasses. "To new beginnings." We clinked glasses, and I watched as Nora lifted hers to her lips, then hesitated. "Actually, I probably shouldn't," she said. "The doctor said to avoid alcohol completely during the first trimester." "Of course. How thoughtless of me." I set her glass aside. "How did the appointment go? Everything developing normally?" "Perfect," Tommy said quickly. "The doctor said everything looks great." "Which doctor are you seeing? I'd like to send flowers to the office. Thank them for taking such good care of you." Nora and Tommy exchanged a glance. "Dr. Morrison at Women's Health Associates," Nora said. "But that's really not necessary." "Dr. Morrison." I made a mental note to verify whether such a person existed. "When's the next appointment? I'd love to come along, hear the heartbeat." "Oh, that's sweet," Nora said. "But it's still early. Maybe in a few weeks?" "A few weeks? Always a few weeks. Everything was always just out of reach, just far enough in the future to avoid immediate verification. I was beginning to suspect there was no pregnancy at all. The next morning, I called Women's Health Associates. They had no Dr. Morrison on staff and no patient named Nora Brennan in their system. I hung up the phone and smiled for the first time in weeks. They'd made a mistake, a small one, but in engineering, small mistakes often led to catastrophic failures. It was time to start building my own catastrophe. I spent the next week playing the role of the supportive, if wounded husband. I asked about morning sickness, offered to cook foods that wouldn't trigger nausea, and suggested we start looking at baby furniture. Tommy and Nora seemed to relax into the deception, their guard dropping as they convinced themselves I'd accepted their story. Meanwhile, I was methodically documenting everything: bank records, email communications, property filings, and most importantly, the inconsistencies in their pregnancy narrative. Every lie was a thread I could pull when the time came to unravel their scheme. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon when I was reviewing our insurance policies. Nora had made changes to our life insurance 6 months earlier, adding Tommy as a secondary beneficiary. The primary beneficiary was still listed as Nora, but if something happened to both of us, Tommy would inherit $2 million. $2 million was a powerful motive for almost anything. I called our insurance agent, pretending to want clarification about the policy terms. "The change was Nora's idea," Jennifer Walsh explained. "She said you two were updating your estate planning to include extended family. Very thoughtful, really. Most people don't think about secondary beneficiaries." "Did she mention why Tommy specifically?" "She said he'd been having financial difficulties, and you wanted to make sure he'd be taken care of if something happened to you both. Honestly, Jack, it spoke well of your character." My character. I wondered what Jennifer would think of my character when this was all over. That evening I suggested we have dinner at Romano's, the Italian place where Nora and I had gone for our first anniversary. I wanted to test something. "This is nice," Nora said, settling into the booth we'd shared so many times before. "I've missed this. Missed us." "Have you?" I asked, cutting into my chicken parmesan. "Because I've been thinking about timeline and some things don't add up." Tommy tensed beside her. "What do you mean?" "Well, you said one of your encounters was in March, at that conference in Springfield. But I remember now. That's the weekend you helped your mother move into her new apartment. I have the photos on my phone from when you sent them to me." Nora's fork paused halfway to her mouth. That must have been a different weekend." "No, I'm pretty sure it was the same weekend. March 22nd, right? That's what you said." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my photos. "Here we are. You sent this from your mom's kitchen. Timestamped March 22nd at 2:30 p.m. The photo showed Nora and her mother surrounded by moving boxes, both wearing the kind of exhausted smiles that come after a long day of physical labor. There was no way she could have been in Springfield that day. "I must have gotten the dates confused," she said weakly. "Easy to do," I agreed. "Pregnancy brain, right? I read that's a real thing." Tommy jumped in. "It was probably a different weekend. We've been seeing each other for a while. The exact dates aren't important." "You're right, of course. The important thing is the baby. I raised my water glass in a toast. To the future. They drank, but I could see the worry in their eyes. I'd planted a seed of doubt about their story's credibility. Now I needed to water it. Over the next few days, I continued to poke gentle holes in their narrative. I mentioned running into the concierge from the Marriott, who didn't remember seeing Nora there in March. I brought up the Riverside Inn's renovation closure during the period when they claimed to have met there. Each contradiction was presented as casual conversation, but the cumulative effect was clear. They were scrambling to keep their story straight. The pressure finally got to Tommy on Sunday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when he cornered me, his usual charm replaced by barely controlled frustration. Look, Jack, I know you're upset about this whole situation, but the constant questions aren't helping anyone. I'm just trying to understand what happened. Is that wrong? You're trying to catch us in lies. I looked at him with what I hoped was wounded confusion. Tommy, you're my brother. Nora's my wife. Why would I want to catch you in lies? Because you can't accept that she chose me over you. There it was. The real Tommy, stripped of pretense and charm. The entitled child who'd never learned that wanting something didn't mean deserving it. Is that what this is about? Her choosing you? She's been unhappy for years, Jack. You're so focused on your work, your projects, your perfectly organized life that you never noticed she was suffocating. I gave her something you couldn't. Excitement, passion, spontaneity. And a baby. Tommy's expression flickered. And a baby. When's the due date, by the way? I want to make sure I request time off work. December, he said quickly. Early December. That would put conception in early March, consistent with Nora's timeline. But if she was really 11 weeks along when she told me 3 weeks ago, the due date would be late November, not early December. December's a great time for a baby, I said. Christmas babies are special. After Tommy left for his morning run, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and my growing file of evidence. They were falling apart under the slightest pressure, their story fragmenting like a poorly built foundation. It was time to start the demolition. I called Marcus Webb and scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. When I arrived at his office, I brought printouts of the emails I'd found, copies of the insurance documents, and a detailed timeline of the financial irregularities I'd discovered. Jesus, Jack, Marcus said after reviewing everything. This isn't just adultery. This is fraud, embezzlement, maybe conspiracy. You need to call the police. Not yet. I want to handle this my way first. Your way could land you in legal trouble if you're not careful. What exactly are you planning? I outlined my strategy, watching Marcus's expression shift from concern to admiration to worry. It's clever, he admitted. Probably legal, definitely satisfying. But are you sure you want to go this route? Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. They made their choice when they decided to steal from me. I'm just making sure there are consequences. Marcus leaned back in his chair. All right, I'll prepare the paperwork. But Jack, be careful. Cornered animals do unpredictable things. That evening, I put my plan into motion. I waited until Tommy and Nora were settled in the living room, watching a movie, before joining them with a bottle of wine and 3 glasses. I've been thinking about our arrangement, I announced, settling into my recliner, and I've decided to make it official. Nora muted the television. What do you mean? I mean, I'm ready to transfer ownership of the house. No more lease to own, no more monthly payments. I want you two to have it free and clear. Tommy sat up straighter. That's incredibly generous. It's the right thing to do. The baby should grow up in a stable home without the uncertainty of rental agreements. I poured wine for Tommy and myself, sparkling cider for Nora. I've already had the papers drawn up. We can sign tomorrow. Jack, I don't know what to say, Nora said, tears forming in her eyes. This means everything to us. Family takes care of family, I replied, echoing Tommy's earlier words. I just have one request. Anything, Tommy said quickly. I'd like to throw a little housewarming party. Nothing fancy, just close friends and family. A chance for everyone to celebrate your new beginning. They agreed enthusiastically, probably seeing it as my final surrender to their version of events. They had no way of knowing that the papers I'd had drawn up were eviction notices, or that the party would be their public humiliation. Sometimes the best revenge was simply letting people destroy themselves in front of an audience. The party was scheduled for the following Saturday. I spent the week making preparations, sending invitations, and putting the final pieces of my plan into place. I also made one last attempt to verify whether Nora was actually pregnant. The opportunity came when she asked me to pick up her prescription from the pharmacy. I'd offered to run errands while she was feeling tired, another supposed pregnancy symptom that conveniently appeared whenever she wanted to avoid something. At the pharmacy, I asked to speak with the pharmacist privately. I'm worried about drug interactions, I explained. My wife is pregnant, and I want to make sure everything she's taking is safe. The pharmacist, a kind woman in her 50s, pulled up Nora's profile on her computer. Let's see. She's currently taking sertraline for anxiety and levothyroxine for thyroid function. Both are generally safe during pregnancy, though we'd want to monitor dosages. No prenatal vitamins, no folic acid supplements. Nothing that suggested she was actually preparing her body for pregnancy. Should she be taking prenatal vitamins? I asked. Absolutely. Most women start those as soon as they begin trying to conceive. I'm surprised her doctor hasn't recommended them yet. Maybe she forgot to mention it. I'll ask her to call the office. I left the pharmacy with confirmation of what I'd already suspected. There was no pregnancy. There never had been. The whole thing was an elaborate fiction designed to justify their betrayal and theft. On Saturday morning, I woke up early and spent an hour in my workshop making final preparations. I'd moved most of my important possessions out of the house over the past week, claiming I was decluttering to make room for baby furniture. In reality, I was ensuring that nothing I cared about would be caught in the blast radius of what was coming. Tommy and Nora were in the kitchen when I came inside, arguing in hushed tones about something they quickly stopped discussing when they saw me. Everything all right? I asked. Fine, Nora said quickly. Just discussing last-minute party details. Great. The guests should start arriving around 2. I invited about 30 people, your family, my family, some friends from work, neighbors. Should be a nice crowd. Tommy looked uncomfortable. 30 people? That seems like a lot for a small gathering. Well, it's not every day my brother and wife start a new life together. I figured we should make it memorable. Memorable was certainly the word for what I had planned. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. The first guests were Nora's parents, followed by her sister Ellen, then my coworkers from the engineering firm. Within an hour, the house was full of people making polite conversation and pretending the situation wasn't deeply awkward. I played the gracious host, making sure everyone had drinks and food, facilitating introductions, and maintaining the fiction that this was a celebration rather than a wake for my marriage. Tommy and Nora worked the room like politicians, accepting congratulations and sympathy in equal measure. At 3:30, I called for everyone's attention. I want to thank you all for coming, I said, standing in the center of the living room. This is a difficult time for all of us, but it's also a time of new beginnings. Tommy and Nora are starting their life together, and I want everyone here to witness the transfer of this house to them. I pulled out the folder of documents I'd prepared and set them on the coffee table. These papers will make the transfer official. Tommy, Nora, would you like to sign first? They approached the table with eager smiles, probably thinking this was the moment they'd finally won. Tommy picked up the pen and started to sign before actually reading the documents. Wait, Nora said, scanning the first page. Jack, what is this? Exactly what I said, the transfer of the house. But this is an eviction notice. The room fell silent. Every conversation stopped as 30 pairs of eyes focused on the three of us. That's right, I said calmly. The house was transferred to Brennan Holdings LLC 2 weeks ago. As the managing member of that company, I'm officially notifying you that your tenancy is terminated, effective immediately. Tommy's face went red. You can't do this. We had an agreement. We did. You agreed to a 6-month lease, which I'm terminating due to non-payment of rent and violation of the terms. What non-payment? What violation? I pulled out another folder. The lease clearly states that any illegal activity on the premises is grounds for immediate eviction. Embezzlement qualifies as illegal activity. I began reading from the emails I'd printed, detailing the financial fraud they'd committed over the past year. The amount stolen, the fake investment accounts, the forged documents, every crime laid out in their own words, in front of their families and friends. Nora tried to interrupt. Jack, please, not here. Where else? I asked. You chose to make our private business public when you announced your pregnancy to this room. Speaking of which, I turned to address the crowd. I should mention that there is no pregnancy. There never was. Nora isn't taking prenatal vitamins, she's never been to a prenatal appointment, and she's been drinking alcohol throughout her supposed first trimester. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the shock and disgust on faces throughout the room as people processed what they'd just learned. Ellen stepped forward, her face pale. Nora, is this true? Nora looked around the room desperately, seeking an ally who wasn't there. It's complicated. Jack doesn't understand. I understand perfectly, I said. You and Tommy have been planning this for months. The affair story was cover for the financial fraud. The pregnancy was supposed to be your justification for taking my house. You thought I'd be so guilt-ridden and emotionally destroyed that I wouldn't notice you'd stolen our life savings. Tommy made a lunge toward me, but my coworker Dave stepped between us. I wouldn't, Dave said quietly. Not in front of all these witnesses. You planned this, Tommy said, his voice shaking with rage. You set us up. I gave you every opportunity to tell the truth. You chose to keep lying. I looked around the room at the assembled crowd. I think the party's over. Tommy, Nora, you have until tomorrow morning to remove your belongings from my property. People began filing out. The silence broken only by whispered conversations and the sound of car doors slamming. Within 15 minutes, the house was empty except for the three of us. Nora collapsed onto the couch, her careful facade finally crumbling completely. Jack, please, we can work this out. I'll pay back the money, we'll get counseling, whatever you want. What I want is for you to be gone by morning. Tommy stepped closer, his fists clenched. You self-righteous bastard. You think you're so much better than everyone else with your perfect plans and your perfect control, but you're just a pathetic, boring man who couldn't keep his wife interested. You're right, I said. I am boring. I pay my bills, I keep my promises, and I don't steal from people who trust me. If that makes me pathetic, I can live with it. This isn't over, Tommy said. Yes, it is. And Tommy, your work visa was sponsored through our family business partnership. I dissolved that partnership this morning. You have 60 days to find new sponsorship or leave the country. The color drained from his face. You can't do that. I already did. The paperwork was filed this morning. I left them sitting in the wreckage of their scheme and walked out to my truck. As I drove away, I could see them through the living room window. They're probably trying to figure out how to salvage something from the disaster they'd created. They'd wanted to destroy my life and steal everything I'd worked for. Instead, they'd destroyed themselves. It wasn't the ending I'd planned when I married Nora 8 years ago, but it was the ending they'd earned. The next morning, I arrived at the house at 8 o'clock to find Tommy loading boxes into a rental truck. His movements were sharp and angry, each item thrown rather than placed. Nora was nowhere to be seen. Where's your partner in crime? I asked, leaning against my truck. Gone, Tommy said without looking up. Left about an hour ago with whatever she could fit in her car. Smart woman. Rats usually abandon sinking ships first. Tommy straightened up, a box of books in his hands. You really think you've won, don't you? I think I've solved a problem. There's a difference. You destroyed 2 people's lives over money. No, you destroyed 2 people's lives over money. I just made sure there were consequences. He loaded the box with more force than necessary. Nora really did love you, you know, in the beginning. Maybe, but love doesn't steal $40,000 from joint accounts. Love doesn't forge signatures on insurance policies. Love doesn't fabricate pregnancies to justify theft. She was scared. We both were. The real estate market collapsed, her commissions dried up, and I had some debts from the restaurant business. We were trying to find a way out. There are legal ways out of financial trouble. Bankruptcy, debt consolidation, asking for help. You chose fraud instead. Tommy set down the box he was carrying and faced me directly. You want to know the truth? Nora never wanted to hurt you. That was all my idea. I convinced her that you'd be better off without her, that you'd find someone who actually appreciated your boring, predictable life. And you believed that? I believed she deserved better than a man who cared more about his workshop than his wife. I considered this for a moment. Maybe there was some truth in it. Maybe I had been neglectful, too focused on work and projects to notice my marriage deteriorating. But that didn't excuse what they'd done. Even if that's true, it doesn't justify stealing from me. No, Tommy admitted. It doesn't. We stood there in uncomfortable silence. 2 brothers who'd never really understood each other, now separated by a gulf that couldn't be bridged. What happens now? Tommy asked. Now you finish loading your truck and disappear. If you're smart, you'll find a way to stay in the country legally. If you're really smart, you'll pay back the money you stole. And if I don't, then I file criminal charges and let the legal system sort it out. Tommy nodded slowly. Fair enough. He finished loading in silence while I watched from the porch. When the truck was full, he walked over to where I was standing. For what it's worth, Jack, I am sorry. Not for getting caught, for doing it in the first place. You didn't deserve this. No, I didn't. Will you tell Dad? Our father had remarried when I was 12 and Tommy was 8. Despite the age difference and different mothers, we'd grown up as brothers. Our father, now in his 70s and living in Florida, would be devastated to learn what Tommy had done. That's up to you, I said, but he's going to find out eventually. Tommy climbed into the truck and started the engine. As he pulled away, he rolled down the window. "Take care of yourself, Jack." "You too." I watched until the truck disappeared around the corner, then walked through the empty house one last time. The rooms looked smaller without furniture, the walls marked with nail holes and scuff marks from 8 years of married life. In the kitchen, the faucet was still dripping. I got my tools from the workshop and fixed it properly this time, replacing the worn washers and tightening the connections until the flow was steady and sure. Some problems just needed the right attention to be solved permanently. Over the next month, I put the house on the market and found a buyer within 2 weeks. The sale price was enough to cover the money Tommy and Nora had stolen, plus a significant profit. I used part of the proceeds to buy a smaller place across town, a craftsman bungalow with a detached garage that would make a perfect workshop. The legal aftermath was surprisingly simple. Nora had disappeared completely, probably using her real estate connections to start over somewhere else under a different name. Tommy had managed to find new visa sponsorship through a construction company in Toronto, and he'd begun making monthly payments to reimburse the stolen money. It would take him years to pay it all back, but at least he was trying. I never filed criminal charges. The public humiliation and financial consequences seemed like sufficient punishment, and I had no desire to spend months in courtrooms reliving their betrayal. 3 months after the party, I was in my new workshop when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Ellen Rodriguez's number. "Jack, it's Ellen. I hope it's okay that I'm calling." "Of course. How are you doing?" "I'm fine. I was calling about Nora." I set down the carburetor I'd been rebuilding. "What about her?" "She's in Phoenix now, working for a property management company. She asked me to call you." "Why?" "She wants to apologize. Really apologize, not the kind she tried at the party. She knows what she did was wrong, and she wants to make it right." I thought about this for a moment. Part of me was curious to hear what Nora had to say, but a larger part of me had moved beyond caring about her explanations or apologies. "Tell her I appreciate the gesture, but it's not necessary. We're done, Ellen. Completely done." "Are you sure? She seems genuinely remorseful." "I'm sure. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned." After hanging up, I went back to work on the carburetor. It was from a 1967 Mustang that I'd bought as a project car, something to keep my hands busy during the long evenings in my new place. The engine had been neglected for years, but with patience and the right parts, it could be restored to better than original condition. Unlike marriages, machines were honest. When they broke, you could see exactly what was wrong and fix it. When they worked, you knew you could trust them to keep working as long as you maintained them properly. I'd learned to prefer that kind of honesty. 6 months later, I ran into Dave from work at the hardware store. We chatted about projects and mutual friends before he brought up the subject I'd been expecting. "You know, Jack, people still talk about that party, what you did to Tommy and Nora." "I imagine they do." "Some folks think you were too harsh. Public humiliation and all that." "And what do you think?" Dave considered this while examining a set of socket wrenches. "I think they made their choice when they decided to steal from you. Everything that happened after that was just consequences." "Exactly. Still, it must have been hard, planning all that, knowing how it would end." "It had been hard. Not the planning, that was just problem solving. But living with the knowledge of their betrayal for weeks, pretending to be the wounded husband while methodically documenting their crimes, had been exhausting. The alternative was letting them get away with it, I said. I couldn't live with that." Dave nodded. "Fair enough. By the way, you should know. Word got around about how you handled things. You've got a reputation now." "What kind of reputation?" "The kind that makes people think twice before trying to cheat you." I wasn't sure if that was good or bad, but it was honest. And honesty, I'd learned, was worth protecting. A year after the party, I was completely settled into my new life. The bungalow had become exactly what I'd hoped, a comfortable home with space for my projects and hobbies. I joined a classic car restoration club and made new friends who shared my interests. My work at the engineering firm was going well, and I'd even started dating again, though nothing serious yet. The Mustang was nearly finished, its engine purring with mechanical precision. I'd taken it to a few car shows where other enthusiasts admired the attention to detail and quality of the restoration. It felt good to create something beautiful and functional from something that had been broken and abandoned. On a warm Saturday afternoon, I was polishing the car's chrome bumpers when my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, walked over with a pitcher of lemonade. "That's a beautiful car, Jack," she said, pouring 2 glasses. "You should be proud." "Thank you. It's been a good project." My late husband would have loved it. He was always tinkering with engines in our garage. We sat on my front steps, drinking lemonade and watching the neighborhood kids play in the street. It was peaceful in a way my old life had never been. No hidden agendas, no carefully managed deceptions, just honest simplicity. "Can I ask you something?" Mrs. Patterson said after a while. "Sure." "Do you ever regret it? What happened with your wife and brother?" I'd been asked this question before, by friends and family members who thought I should feel guilty about the public nature of their downfall. The answer was always the same. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that people I trusted chose to betray that trust. But I don't regret holding them accountable for their choices. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. Good. Some people need to learn that actions have consequences. That evening, I received an unexpected phone call from Marcus Webb. "Jack, I have some news you might find interesting. Remember that fraud investigation you started with the Real Estate Commission?" "What about it?" "They found evidence that Nora and Tommy weren't just stealing from you. They'd been running a larger scheme, using fake property listings to collect deposits from multiple buyers for the same properties. The commission estimates they took at least $200,000 from various victims over the past 2 years. I felt a cold satisfaction at this news. Their betrayal of me hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of criminal behavior that would have continued if I hadn't stopped it. "Are they pressing charges?" "Already filed. Both of them are facing federal fraud charges. Tommy's probably looking at deportation and prison time. Nora's going to have a hard time avoiding jail." After hanging up, I walked out to my garage and looked at the Mustang, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I'd taken something broken and made it whole again through patience, skill, and attention to detail. In a way, I'd done the same thing with my life. Tommy and Nora had tried to steal my future, but they'd only succeeded in freeing me from a marriage built on lies and a relationship with a brother who'd never really been trustworthy. Their betrayal had been painful, but it had also been illuminating. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd thought, more resourceful than I'd imagined, and more capable of protecting myself than I'd ever needed to be. These were valuable lessons, even if they'd come at a high price. The next morning, I drove the Mustang to work for the first time. My colleagues gathered in the parking lot to admire it, asking questions about the restoration process and complimenting the quality of the work. "How long did this take you?" asked Sarah from accounting. "About a year, working evenings and weekends." "Was it worth all that time and effort?" I looked at the car, every surface perfect, every component functioning exactly as it should, every detail reflecting hours of careful attention. It was honest in a way that few things in life were. When you turned the key, it started. When you pressed the accelerator, it responded. When you maintained it properly, it rewarded you with reliable performance. "Yes," I said, "it was worth it." That afternoon, I received a text message from an unknown number. "This is Nora. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to tell you that you were right about everything. I'm sorry for what we did to you. I hope you can find happiness." I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Some apologies came too late to matter, and some bridges, once burned, were better left as ashes. I had found happiness, but not in the way she probably imagined. I'd found it in the satisfaction of honest work, in the company of trustworthy friends, and in the peace that came from knowing I could depend on myself. The Mustang started on the first try, its engine settling into a smooth idle that spoke of precision and care. I drove home through the early evening traffic, windows down, enjoying the mechanical symphony of a machine that did exactly what it was designed to do. It was a good life, simple, honest, and entirely my own, and that was enough.